So good afternoon. Welcome to the College of Labor and Employment Lawyers webinar, AI in Employment Law, Powering Your Practice Today. I am reporting from Tampa, Florida, and I am still here. And if I go out, I will call back in, but no problems if you're all wondering what's happening in Tampa. Our weather seems to be still okay. So I'm Cynthia Sass, and I'm a fellow and member of the Board of Governors. And as the fellows attending this webinar, we represent a group of attorneys who have been practicing 20 plus years, probably a lot more than that. I know I'm 37 years practicing. And during that time, we all have experienced a lot of technology changes in our practice. And if you could just indulge me for 1 minute, maybe 2 minutes, so we can go down memory lane as to how we used to practice and how it's changed. Let's talk about when we first started, and maybe the people 20 years ago didn't, but when I first started, we had typewriters and we had carbon paper, and we were so excited about whiteout and the little tape that you could push to erase things. And then the computers came in, and when computers came in, then the typewriters went out the door. We had dictation, people now, and that went out the door. We were dictating, and then we were able to do some things that our assistants were doing when the computer came in, and it took some time for us to learn how to use the computers. And then there was the research issue, as we remember going in the library and at law school, researching, shepherdizing, finding the books, going to the big library, and that all went away because we then started having electronic research, which became more efficient, Lexis, and it's gotten even more. And so then the internet came in, and I remember when the internet came in, and one of the marketing guys came in when it first started and said, "You're going to advertise your firm on the internet," and I'm like, I am not that type of attorney. I would never do that. And guess what? I advertise, and that's where I get a lot of my business now is on the internet. So then came COVID, or we have emails instead of now the mail we don't use. We use the fax machine very infrequently. And now we have remote work. So you need to remember as members that we have seen a lot of changes, and we have adopted to those changes, and those changes has made us more efficient. There's some things that maybe we lost when we let go of those changes, but in the overall, we've adopted and we thrived because we've made it in our careers. So now we're here at AI. AI is one of those changes that we need to adopt to and move ahead with. It's been here for a while, and we put this seminar on for our members so that we could give a comprehensive overview of what AI is going on in our practice, how we can use it, and the ethical issues. We have amazing speakers. I'm going to stop talking very quickly, but we have amazing speakers today. We have Jenny Goltz, and Jay, I'm going to try to pronounce your name right. Jay Mazawan, is that right? Kinda? Okay, you can correct me.
Good enough.
All right, I tried. Okay, Jay, and then we also have Lindsay White, who unfortunately we are unable to have her by video. She's by phone. Somehow our platform wasn't working the greatest. So anyways, we adopt, as you say, with technology. Sometimes things happen and you adopt with it. So I'm thrilled to have Jay here, and he agreed to do this almost last minute, which is amazing. He is a visionary, an entrepreneur. He is on the cutting edge of AI in our industry, and specifically in labor and employment law. He's a co-founder and CEO of Eve, which is a software that is used by many labor and employment practitioners. And he's spoken to 1,000 attorneys to see how they are dealing with the challenges they face when they're implementing AI in their practice. And then we have 2 attorneys that are the cream of the crop here. We have Jenny Goltz and Lindsay White. Both had represented management. Jenny was a partner in a major firm, and then also worked for Am Law 100 firms representing huge corporations. And then she started her own firm, Goltz Employment Law and Investigation. And she is perfect for this seminar. She was the co-chair of the ABA Workplace and the ABA's Technology and Workplace and Law Committee last year, and she's a co-editor-in-chief of Bloomberg's forthcoming treatise on workplace technology law, and she currently leverages AI in her practice. Lindsay is a litigator, a top-notch litigator at Jackson Lewis, and she also, she's an accomplished litigator. Her past experience before representing management at big firms was she worked as a senior trial attorney and later as a senior trial attorney advisor, special assistant to Chair Charlotte Burrows. She is particularly perfect for this seminar or webinar, is that she specializes in advising people on navigating complex ethical issues when incorporating AI. And she also is currently the employer chair of the ABA Technology and Practice Workplace Committee and a frequent speaker on the do's and don'ts of AI from an ethical standpoint for the legal practice. So we're going to start the seminar first with Jay. So Jay, if you, from a high level standpoint, if you can explain what AI is and how it works.
Absolutely, and thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure, and that was a very kind introduction, Cynthia. I really appreciate it. So AI, I've been in this space for a decade and a half at this point, where early on at Facebook, we were using AI to show you things on Facebook to get you to engage and keep clicking on things, right? And what AI represents is effectively an ability fundamentally to learn from data of all shapes and sizes and be able to take the next action. Historically, what happened is it was only ever good at predicting the next value of something. So let's say you like a red dress. It's going to get good at showing you other red dresses. But what was historically very, very challenging until recently is its ability to do that for text. And now that things like ChatGPT, but really the underlying technology of AI got better enough to account for natural language processing, which is effectively another way of saying text, it's now able to actually do a lot more of learning from information, learning from past cases, learning from litigation tactics. And it's now able to apply that towards everything you're doing, which has been the big stepwise game change in terms of how it pertains to our industry right now.
Okay, so can you give us some lingo so we know the terms that are used in the AI industry so we can sound somewhat proficient in this area?
Absolutely. So I could give you maybe a quick history, and this space changes so rapidly, and we keep on top of the changes. So I'll give you a quick history of how things came about. So one of the first terms that are commonly used by vendors, less common now, but it used to be common, is the underlying technology here is something called transformers, kind of like the robot movies. And the reason why that's considered a seminal change is there was a research paper that came out that is basically titled "Attention is All You Need," but it's a fancy way of saying they were finally able to predict the next word given a sequence of words. Now, what was unexpected was people like ChatGPT and a few others, Google also did this, took that paper and applied significant amounts of training data behind it. So they scraped the entire internet. They also scraped all the patent information, all the public case law and case opinions, and they trained this massive model. And they realized, okay, if you actually give it enough data, it starts almost having similar levels of capabilities to answer questions and complete the next word, if you will, to humans, right? And that was kind of the big game-changing nature of it. And this was coined large language models because they literally are large. This is why NVIDIA and AMD stock prices are shooting through the roof. Is you do need a massive data center to host these models, when that didn't used to be the case. Actually, they used to be very, very small because they were mostly for things like when you go on your iPhone and let's say you type in a few words and it says something like thank you, right? It completes the you for you. That's where the technology used to be. And now it's able to obviously write, like what we can do, we can write an entire demand letter for you or a EEOC charge for you. And that's been the progression it's taken place. And now that large language models came about, the next challenge that happened is large language models lack a inherent understanding similar to how humans do, right? So meaning we've actually been able to learn a lot more through our lifetimes and connect principles and properties that we observe about the world around us and apply that to reasoning in terms of how we give an answer. A large language model doesn't have that capability. And there's this evolving area of research, but effectively what it is good at is like kind of like how a child might make up the next word. If you just ask them for something, they'll just say something back. That's how large language models work. And as a result, the more they say, or depending on the questions you ask, they have a risk for just saying something that makes sense but may not be true. This is known as hallucinations. And this is a large problem, obviously, for legal, because the risks here are if you just use the core large language models similar to ChatGPT or the variants of them like Anthropic, the challenge is you don't know for certain if it's grounded in truth, right? So if you're summarizing a client file and it starts making up things around what the client did, that's not great, right? As a result, worst case scenario is maybe you get disbarred if it goes too far. But even more than that, it's just the amount of time you'd have to put to go and double check the work is potentially more significant than just doing it to begin with, which is where players like us come in, as in like we're super thoughtful around how do you just use. We don't even view it as AI, right? We view it as technology. How do we use it to just get her to do things you don't really want to do anymore, now that you don't have to do it? And that's how we've been thoughtful around building around safeguards and making it very productive for an attorney's workflow in labor and employment and plaintiff litigation in general.
So what is I think it's called closed sourced versus open source or something like that, right? Because I think that's important for the attendees to understand what that is.
Absolutely. So what closed source refers to is you have less visibility, actually almost no visibility, into how the models were trained and how they're served. So the players here that are known for being closed and are popular are people like OpenAI, which is funny given their name, and Anthropic, which is another big one in the space. And of course, all the large players are likely going to come out with their own. Google has something called Gemini. Amazon has something which is not really used. Microsoft will also has something called Copilot, but ultimately they'll likely use OpenAI. Those are all closed source. Now, why is it closed? It's closed because one, they're trying to protect their IP, but two, they have been less than forthcoming about how they've acquired all the data to to actually create the large models, right? So to make the models even better, today we have two avenues of making them better. One is to make them larger, which needs more training data, higher quality data, and literally more computing resources, to the point where Microsoft just spun up a nuclear power plant to power these data centers. And that's one avenue of growth. And the other is making them smarter. And this goes to research, right? So how do you try to solve for things like, hey, it's hallucinating. What is causing it to hallucinate? Can we actually give it some reasoning capabilities? And this goes down 1,000 different research directions, which we are all actively spending a lot of time on. So the challenge with closed source is now the research is also getting closed, and you don't really have visibility into how it works, how they use the data, right? Are they actually following along and doing what you think they're doing? You lose visibility into that. Versus open source, there's really only one large open source option right now, which is from Meta called Llama. And they actually publish, they don't fully publish it, but they tell you this is kind of the data set we're using. Here's how the model is actually structured. And they make it open for other people to actually utilize it and tweak it. And as a result, you have the industry can develop a bit more trust with it. That's the premise anyway, because you actually know how it's built. And you can look out for, how to actually work around the shortcomings a bit more holistically instead of closed source models. That's the two differences.
Okay. So is there a term for, I know a lot of attorneys are worried, and I will get into this further, but about confidentiality and that they're putting their information into this AI and they don't want the AI to learn from it. Is there a term of some sort of program that doesn't learn from your information and keeps it confidential versus if you use, a program that you put your stuff in and it's going to use it for other people? Is there any are there terms for that?
Absolutely, yeah. So by default, ChatGPT, Gemini, if you log in, they'll actually tell you, hey, we retain some of your data for training, right? So obviously look out for things like that. The risk there is, as I've mentioned to you before, the models use all this data to train themselves on, and they complete the next word. So especially when you're dealing with, things that are protecting the client attorney confidentiality, you don't want that information going into a central training data set and have any risk of completing the next word, right? So if someone types in Cynthia Sass, you don't want it to go complete, oh, she had these problems, X and Y. You don't really want that to happen, even if it's hallucinating or making things up, right? So the terms that are used in the industry to prevent this is there's something called zero retention. This is a model provider's way of saying we don't, we contractually and hopefully in an implementation perspective, they don't retain any of the outputs and inputs that you give them. And this is a terminology that is used, and these are agreements that, for example, enterprise contracts of theirs, like for example, we're an enterprise contract of OpenAI and Anthropic, we are able to negotiate these terms with them because they also recognize it's important for some industries to not be able to utilize our data for training their data sets, similar to, where legal industry is obviously one big one, healthcare is another one as well that works like this, as are some offshoots of the government.
Okay, so that's helpful. So in the field of AI, and you've talked to a lot of attorneys, and your product also is for attorneys. And I know you've done a lot of research. So what research have you done regarding the products that are available to the legal profession?
Quite a bit. Historically, this is really the big benefit we see from AI and how we view it. And maybe this is a little different than how other people see it, right? Where historically, the amount of labor required from a vendor perspective, so meaning people like us, to solve for problems that attorneys have, was so massive that we were forced to focus on one or two problems. So for example, like let's say we just do legal research, or maybe we only write demands, or maybe we only do EEOC charges, right? Like, so you pick one concrete problem to work on and you try to amortize the cost of building that solution by trying to sell to multiple people, right? So historically, that's how it was done. The challenges are every law firm is a little different. Everyone has slightly different ways of doing it. And ultimately, law firms and attorneys just want their life to get better and offload more and more of their tasks that they don't have to do anymore to software. And that was the meaningful place where we're different, right? So what we did is we're effectively making the world's best litigator. It's very similar to, if you think about how the self-driving car industry world is going, the difference is there's not a single human that has 100 million miles driven in their lifetime, right? And of also learning actively from 100 million miles driven in their lifetime. what these self-driving car companies can do is they can build the world's best driver. Apologize. And similar to that, what we're trying to build is build the world's best, lawyer and litigator. And now, how do you then apply that knowledge and reasoning capability of this engine towards all the tasks that you would not have been previously able to put the world's best litigator on, like sending off client emails or analyzing and creating chronologies of things and all the things that you would otherwise use not use the best possible person for.
Okay, so Jenny, are you there? There you are. Okay. Are you on mute? I think so. If you can tell us now, Jenny, you use a lot of AI in your practice. If you can share with the participants what AI products that you have used or tried and have found effective, and explain your practice a little bit so everyone knows kind of what your practice is and how you're using it.
Absolutely. And I'm just getting my screen share ready to go so I can walk you through some of the platforms that I use. So as Cynthia said at the beginning when she was introducing me, can you guys see my screen yet? No, let me get this going. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Great. I'm going to turn the closed captioning off so I don't see myself saying so much. So as Cynthia mentioned when she was introducing me, I started my own practice a couple of years ago. I'm a sole practitioner. For the most part, I think I would say I still identify as a management side attorney, but my practice is kind of a hybrid. There are two main components of it. One is the counseling, compliance, training side of things. And then the other component, which is probably the majority of my practice and the piece that I use AI primarily for, is investigations. So as a sole practitioner, I have been able to leverage some AI platforms pretty effectively to be able to conduct investigations on my own without a lot of personnel support. And I think it has really enhanced and supported my practice in a lot of ways. I know that a lot of lawyers and people in various jobs are afraid of AI to the extent that it can, perform certain tasks like research and drafting that lawyers can. We're not getting replaced just yet. I really see it as a support, a complement, an enhancement to my practice rather than a substitute. And I know Lindsay will get into, the ethical considerations around the duty to supervise and to, make sure that quality control procedures are in place so that these hallucinations aren't impacting your practice and the level of service that you're delivering to your clients. But without getting too into the weeds on those details, this slide gives you an overview of the platforms that I have been using in my practice. One is Fireflies, and I'll walk you through some screenshots of how this works. And I actually have a demo I can show you. Fireflies it's not specific to legal work. Essentially it's a video meeting transcription service. And it can join your meeting. It transcribes the meetings. It basically generates a transcript of any meeting that you invite it to. There's also a mobile app, so you can, if you have an in-person meeting, you can go into it with your phone. And you'll see this, I always ask for permission to make sure people understand that it's being transcribed, that they're being recorded, but you can actually physically bring your phone and start the recording, and it will record the meeting. It can detect voices, so it'll differentiate between the different speakers, and it inputs the transcript into a platform, which I'll show you, that has different functions in terms of searching, asking questions. It has a built-in bot called a chat bot named Fred. So you can ask Fred different questions about things that occurred in the meeting. It can generate action items, lists, summarize the meetings. So this is a great tool that I like to use just to, for my own purposes, really note-taking is the primary purpose I use it for. I'm an excellent note-taker. That's part of why I like investigations, but I find that it's really helpful to have a transcript that I can cross-reference to make sure that I type things down accurately, to reaffirm my own memory and clarify things. Sometimes you can actually go back and listen to the portion of the recording that is associated with the transcript, so that you can remind yourself of the inflection, if there was a pause, verify. Sometimes I find the transcripts extremely accurate, but every once in a while there is something, if someone mumbles or mispronounces something, or for various reasons, things could be misspelled or taken down inaccurately. So you can actually go back and listen to it to confirm the accuracy of either your notes or the transcript. And so I'll show you through I'll walk you through some of Firefly's capabilities. I also use, to a lesser extent, CoCounsel, which is part of Westlaw now. It was originally developed by Casetext, but they merged, or Westlaw acquired Casetext. In any event, these platforms now interface with each other, and I primarily use it for legal research purposes, which I don't do very often anymore, but for my purposes, it's pretty effective, and I'll walk you through how I use it. And then finally, I use Eve, which is Jay's product, and it is a legal AI platform specifically designed for employment attorneys. So although my practice is focused on investigations, I do a little bit of litigation type work, primarily pre-litigation. I will handle demand letters, position statements. I don't do a lot of work in court, but I believe that any of these skills that I'm going to show you can be applied to litigation as well, because I imagine most of the folks on this call are probably litigators. So this is just a screenshot of what Fireflies looks like when you log on. Your feed will show a summary of a recent meeting, of whatever your most recent meeting was. And as you can see, it really does distill it down to the main points.
Jenny, I think your slide, I don't think we're still on the overview.
Oh. Interesting. Okay. You know what? I think I'm showing you the wrong. That's what. Presenter slideshow. There we go. Okay. That's what I wanted to show you. So this is this is basically when you log into Fireflies, it looks like this. It shows you your most recent meeting. It shows you what you have coming up on the right side here. It shows you can add to a live meeting. So if I wanted to, if I was on a Zoom or a Teams meeting or Google Meet, I could actually click this and add the bot to the meeting as it was going on. The other way to add the bot to the meeting is by inviting Fred to the invite. So when I invite someone to a meeting, I just add Fred as an invitee and he shows up. It also, I have it configured to automatically send everyone else on the meeting a notification letting them know that Fred's going to be there, that he's transcribing the meeting, that he's recording the meeting, so that people are aware that it's there. On the side, these are the different options. On the left side, meetings. If you click meetings, it will pull up all of your meetings, dating back to however long you've been using it. And then I'll show you, some of these different options here. The apps, I'll walk you through how the apps work a little bit later.
Jenny, can I ask you a question? So on that, so this that you're showing us, is that that's a meeting that you had and it just summarized this, or was this a outline, or what is this?
No, this is summarizing a meeting that I had.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. This is just an example, a slide showing the skills that co-counsel has. That's the case text / Westlaw product. Again, I primarily use it for research, and I'll show you how to do it, but it does have these different capabilities. And then this is, and Jay will, I know Jay has some mock cases that he can demo for you, but this is an example of what the various skills that Eve has. And a neat thing about Eve is it has some set skills, but it also has the ability for you to teach it skills. So when I first onboarded to Eve, it did not have any skills specifically geared towards investigation. I worked with Jay and members of his team to develop my own skills that I can apply when I start a matter. I can say, here's an investigation of an employee complaint, and if I apply that template, it has certain skills that it goes through at the outset of every investigation to walk me through, here are the initial steps that you need to be thinking about. So I'm gonna kick it over to Jay just to do a couple quick demos on case text. I think I have to change. Yeah, Jay, I'm gonna make you the presenter now so you can show the group some of Eve's capabilities. Do you have it, Jay?
Can people see the screen?
Yes, it's loading.
Perfect. So similar to what Jenny was saying, how Eve works and how we've designed everything is to keep you, productive around all the different workflows you might be doing within your daily life or during working on a particular case end to end. So when you log in, we recommend you set up the account to track all the different matters you're working on. And depending on if you have an integration we support or not, this would be done automatically for you if you're already keeping track of this information in your CRM that we support. So how it works is, let's say you are working on a particular case, and similar to what Jenny just walked us through, you have gone in and recorded a client call, and you have to effectively evaluate the case. So first, when you log into Eve and go into a matter, Eve will actually help you by telling you what are the common things she can do and people use her for. And you'll see that it's split across the life cycle of a case. So again, today we are hyper-focused on plaintiff litigation. So labor and employment is our practice area that we focus on. We're adding on more as time goes on. And you'll see that we can start off by evaluating case. So all you have to do is click on this button and then provide a list of documents that you may have. So in this case, we have maybe the client transcript, the offer letter from the client, and maybe some emails that they gave you. And what you'll notice is Eve gets to work right away. So just by clicking it, you don't have to worry about prompting or sending Eve very clear messages. She'll come pre-configured a little bit with what to do, and you can always go and improve it. So if you have a particular way in which you and your firm likes to do summaries, you can just teach Eve, similar to how you would teach a new hire on your team, how it is that you would like to perform these summaries of evaluating a case. So you'll notice that Eve already tries to tell you what are the potential claims you should try to go after, and she'll back up our reasoning, right? So these are the key facts. And let's say that we want to double check something along these lines. So for example, how much was he actually paid? Eve will pull out exactly where she got that information from and why it is that she thinks that is actually a key fact that matters here. And this is something that's, one, is hard to do on the side, because as you remember, things like ChatGPT just makes up text. We actually ground truth it and show you exactly where it gets it from. And after this, what's cool is you can actually set up, and I believe, Jenny, you've done this for a few things already, but you can set up something called blueprints, which is long form drafting capabilities of Eve. So one of the challenges that AI historically has is it's not really able to learn from text. We've solved for that, right? So now you can give it examples of documents that you write often, whether it be demand letters, EOC charges, whatever, and it's able to learn from the style, the structure, and the tone you typically like to use in your cases, in your firm. And it'll figure out that, it'll try to figure out the formatting to the best of its ability, and it'll work on it. So in this case, let's say we want to kick things off and actually just make a demand letter. All we have to do is say, let's write a demand letter and say, hey, Eve, like, focus on the claim. And we just go, which the share button is hiding. And now Eve will actually go through, use all the analysis we just did right here, right? So it knows the fact that we were doing some work and what your thought process was while doing the work. And it'll use all the information that you uploaded thus far. And it'll go ahead and actually start analyzing what to do and understand how you typically like to write demand letters and start drafting the entire multi-page document for you. And you'll notice that she's already starting to do that, right? So notice that for this particular case, this is probably the structure you want to use, right? So have these type of sections in here, and she'll go through, utilize all the data that she has access to at this point to write this long form document. And again, the whole goal here is how do you get all the processes that are in your firm to get more repeatable and still have the same level of quality that you would like. And I'll show you at the end, once it's done drafting, that, obviously as attorneys producing a work product, you should still review it. And Eve will tell you what information she used right here. So you could quickly review what are the basic piece of information she's working off of. And secondly, obviously you can read the doc and make things better as well, which once it's done, I'll show you how that works.
Yeah, and one thing I would add is you might want to, Jay, can you show them the instructions function? Because you mentioned that you're pretty geared towards the plaintiff side at this point, and that's actually something that I had raised with you when I first started using Eve, because the first couple matters I used on a trial basis, I felt like the output I was getting was very geared towards plaintiff's attorneys, whereas I represent management. And you taught me how to teach Eve my posture by using the instructions function, which has been very effective.
Thank you for calling that out. Absolutely. So this is one of the nice parts. Underneath the hood, what we're really doing is we're trying to get Eve to be a really, really good litigator and understand law. And on top of that, given the different functionalities you've seen, like teaching Eve, understanding documents, you're then able to direct Eve how to do the work in your law firm. And exactly like what Jenny said, you can work around, not work around, but you can teach Eve how to do work in your firm by using this feature called instructions, which is effectively you telling Eve what your objective is in this particular case or session that you're working on. And you can give Eve, like, how you like to proceed. You can also add things around tonality and how polite or aggressive you want to be in your language. You can add things around, facts about the case that you're really interested in pursuing. If you're responding to summary judgments, you can put things around which points you want to address the most and how you're planning on doing it. And Eve will actually be able to utilize that knowledge that you're giving it to curate her work even more for the task you're working on. So great point, Jenny. Thank you for bringing that up. So yeah, we can take a look at demand letters. You see how initially she just started off writing it, but at the end of the time, she formatted it to have the same formatting that, in this case, this demo environment follows this format at the end. And on top of this, if for whatever reason you don't like anything, let's say this is wrong, you know, let's say crap. Right. So we can just like give it some feedback and make it even better. So this is just one of the ways in which you use Eve. But ultimately, what Eve helps you with is literally the entire case lifecycle, and whatever is the task that your firm is doing, and you can encode and teach Eve exactly how it is that you'd like to perform tasks. And that's how we're working on it, is we're just making Eve more and more capable by keeping on top of the ever-evolving technology under the hood, and then training it to be better and better as a litigator and a lawyer. And we want to give you the ability to take this best kind of artificial brain and apply it towards all the tasks you're actually working on.
See, I just learned something new. I didn't even know that you could do that function where you edit right in the draft.
Oh, there you go.
I use Eve, and Jay, if you can talk about, because for litigation, it really saves time in discovery. And so when it can help you draft discovery, you can tell it what to do. And then when you send it off to the other side and they send you back their answers or their responses, Eve can tell you what was deficient within like 5 or 10 minutes of the discovery, and then cite case law as to supporting your position that the discovery needs to be supplemented. That's just an amazing thing that takes probably like 10 minutes, because you have all your discovery in Eve, and then you input what the other side sent you, and it just spits it out, and it is a time saver.
That's I'm glad you brought that up, because in my examples of use cases, because I don't do very much discovery anymore, so I don't have that in there. So I'm glad you mentioned that.
So this is really interesting. So Jay, when you use these AI products, can you talk about like security, confidentiality, reliability? I think you've kind of touched on it, but what attorneys should be looking for when they're shopping around for AI types of products, or if they're being approached to buy it, what should they be specifically looking at?
Great questions. There's a few ways of looking around it, right? So one is the basic stuff. So make sure they're using zero retention APIs. So meaning if they have agreements with large language model providers, that they're not giving up that data for others to train on or themselves to train on in a way that doesn't help you or has any risk of leaking client information across trust boundaries. The other thing is giving you control over your data, right? So on Eve, you'll notice there's a delete button next to pretty much everything. And what we do is we give you full control over your data lifecycle. So if you don't want that to exist for some reason, you can just delete it and it's gone. And on top of that, the last one is team. So we've come from, before Eve, I was working on this company called Rubrik, which recently IPO'd. And we used to sell to 3-letter agencies, right? And that was a large part of our revenue, and the whole point was to secure the world's most secure assets. As a result, like, we've just built a team that just fundamentally cares about security and cares about data privacy. And as a result, we're one of the first, I think potentially the first ever LLM-based application to get SOC 2 compliance and HIPAA compliance. And we had that from a very, very early time, and we've continued to maintain and protect and make it even better than the basic minimum of those regulations. And that's something that's harder to keep track of as a attorney evaluating products. But I would probably look for the quality of the team, because if they're not used to working in that secure environment, it's sometimes difficult to know what to avoid without having that experience.
And are those types of things something that you can see in a vendor contract? So when you're signing a contract with a company to purchase their stuff, can you put something like that in a contract, or is that in a contract?
It depends. You can put that in a contract. I think what I've seen more commonly is for firms that actively use your data for them to disclose it in their contracts. So, for example, I believe I don't know if this is as useful in our industry, but there's a company called Spellbook that, again, I don't want to misspeak. Maybe they changed their terms, but when I checked about a year ago, they help with transactional documents, so like reviewing agreements and things along those nature. I believe they have something in their contract around how they use your data for training their models, and they disclose that they do use the data. So I've seen that happen more often. Separately, I believe if the deal sizes get large enough, I think you should be able to have, if you're signing a contractual value with a vendor of more than, let's say, $150,000, you should be able to start working in those terms as well, because they can usually support the legal fees associated with it.
Okay, so Lindsay, this leads me to you. We kind of Jay talked about some of these issues, but you, from an ethical standpoint and the bars, can you share with us what we should be wary about and what we should be aware of when we're using AI?
Yes, yes, sorry, I'm a little under the weather, so my voice is not what it usually is, but it's great to be here. Thank you for inviting me to be on this panel. You've just heard for the last 50 minutes about all the interesting technology, you've seen demos, and I feel like I'm kind of, I don't know, the Grim Reaper here with all the ethical, constraints and considerations, but I guess somebody's got to do it. So there are a lot of different ethical considerations, and I want to flag something that really occurred to me recently, which is it's not just ethical considerations as to making sure that you're not violating ethical obligations when you use this technology, but also as lawyers, we have ethical obligations to have duty, there's the duty of competence. And part of that is being aware of what technologies are out there and understanding how to use them. So I also am of the mindset that the ethical rules require that we stay abreast of these developments and use them for our clients in ways that are helpful. So I wanted to frame this discussion that way. So if you are not aware, there have been numerous ethical opinions that have issued in the last, I would say, 11 months on the use of AI, especially the use of generative AI, which is really what we've been talking about here. I just want to run through those states, and then I'll get into some of the specific rules that these issues touch on. So in California, always leading the way, California, we have a practice guidance that issued November 2023. I do think even if you're not in California, that's a really good one to read. It sets forth really the background and the landscape and the different rules that are implicated. There's also a bar opinion out of Florida from January, one from Kentucky, a very lengthy report from New York, which is the Bar Association Task Force on AI, and it has, it's almost like a treatise. That is also worth a skim because of all the background. There's a great DC bar ethics opinion, which I also recommend looking at because it has, quotes and sort of background and history from everything, various court opinions, and it lists all of the applicable rules. Missouri, Pennsylvania, Minnesota, West Virginia, Texas, North Carolina, and then finally the ABA weighs in with a formal opinion 512, which talks about generative AI tools, which I'll get into in a moment. But if you are in any of these jurisdictions and you have not reviewed those ethical opinions, I highly recommend that you do so. So let's talk about some of these ethical rules that are implicated. First of all, we have a duty of competency, and most of the state bars have interpreted that or have added a comment based on the ABA model rule that the duty of competency extends to being aware of technology and how to use it and the pitfalls, which we've talked a little bit about. But so I think it's important to know that that is out there. And in addition, you know, the state bars are starting to require that attorneys have ethics credits in that area. So for example, in California, as of January of 2025, each lawyer must have 1 hour of technology ethics credit. New York had implemented a requirement back in 2023 where there must be an ethics, or at least a credit of cybersecurity, privacy, and data protection. I do think this is going to be a trend that you see the other bars adopting. Okay, so the duty of competency sort of starts us off. You know, attending seminars like this, I think, are really helpful, not just to pat ourselves on the back, but to understand the technology and the pitfalls and, you know, the benefits. Also, the scope of representation. You know, I do think that we have obligations to identify to our clients, depending on what exactly we're using the data for, you know, to advise clients and get their express, you know, consent to the extent that there are certain risks, so that we're advising our clients and that they're making informed decisions about the use. And Jenny, I don't want to put you on the spot, but in our prep, you talked about how you do this with respect to your practice, because you do a lot of AI. I don't know if you just wanted to chime in briefly on, you know, what you do with respect to your engagement letters when you're using AI.
Well, I do have sorry, you caught me mid-chew. I do have in my engagement, I don't use AI to generate my engagement letters, but I have a clause in my engagement letter that I borrowed from the AI, the ABA guidance that explains that I'm using it and the uses that I deploy it for, and discusses the security protocols so that you know, the client understands that I will be using AI and other forms of technology. I incorporated it into, I already had a clause about technology and using cloud-based storage systems. And so I retitled it to be use of cloud-based technology and AI, and I supplemented it in order to make sure that there's, you know, full transparency and understanding in my engagement letters.
Yeah. So that goes to, you know, sort of the scope of the representation, and it also goes to the duty of competency, because you've got to understand what you're using if you're going to properly explain it to a client and get their informed consent. So another big ethical area that we've been touching on sort of throughout the presentation is this duty of confidentiality. And again, this goes back to understanding and knowing the product. So if you are using an open, you know, an open system, something that is being trained on what you're putting into it and is open to others, you really have to be very careful about not putting anything that's identifiable into that platform. If you represent, you know, a client that's highly unique, and just by giving background information, for example, about the client, they're going to be discoverable. You know, you just have to be very careful about that, because you don't want to inadvertently waive any kind of privilege or disclose any client confidences in a way that's public. And the DC ethics opinion, this is one of the things that I really liked about it. It says with respect to confidentiality, 2 questions that lawyers should be asking are, will the information I provide to the generative AI provider be visible to the provider or to other strangers? And then 2, will my interactions with generative AI affect answers that later users of the GAI will get in a way that could reveal confidential information? So if the answer to the first question is yes, you can explore paid products and getting your own subscription and the terms of that agreement, which would likely give you more protection. If the answer to the second question is yes, I think that's a little more tricky there. And just circling back to the duty of competence, the DC opinion also has 4 questions to ask about, when you're considering using, especially a generative AI platform, has the platform been tested for your purposes by disinterested third parties? Is there anything in the news about your platform with respect to the legal practice? Have other legal professionals that you trust used this generative AI, and have they had any issues? And then finally, which I thought was a very good suggestion, you can ask the platform to do something that you or a respected colleague has done, and you can compare the output with actual human work product as sort of a check, checks and balances of something that you've already done. Did they cite the right cases? Did they come to the right conclusion? That sort of thing. In addition, we have an ethical obligation not to discriminate, harass, or retaliate. This comes into play with AI, just being aware of how the AI has been trained. I mean, the EEOC, not to go off on a tangent, but the EEOC has an entire initiative on AI and algorithmic fairness. And, the concern is, depending on the data that's put in, are we injecting bias into the, into the system? So, for example, some judges are apparently using AI-powered software to help guide them on bail or sentencing decisions, using an algorithm to predict the risk of a defendant committing another crime. Well, I'm sure we're all aware of sort of the issues with the criminal justice system insofar as, people of color and men are more likely to be in the criminal justice system. So there's a risk in using that technology that the judges are inadvertently sort of imputing bias into those decisions. So those are other things to look for when using AI. And again, not wanting to put anyone on the spot, but Jay, I don't know if you have any reactions to any of these sort of ethical issues that I'm discussing sort of as I'm talking about them, please feel free to chime in. I think your perspective as a vendor would be really interesting.
No, Lindsay, I think you've done a great job of summarizing. The one thing I will say is we take an interesting approach, which is we also have to worry about the practicality of allowing a attorney to be ethical. What I mean by that is, let me actually share my screen. Would it be possible to become presenter again, Jenny? Great. If you notice, for example, we also tried, maybe this is one of the, going back to the ethical suggestion around buy software that other attorneys are using, and thank you. a lot of you here are thankfully using Eve. We learn on how to actually make Eve more and more useful and practical to allow yourself to be as ethically minded and using software as possible. So when we initially started, for example, we already were ground truthing the responses in terms of where Eve gets information from to avoid for the hallucination issues, right? And what we initially did was just these buttons would take you to the document, and you'd have to go review the document that the information came from. But what we found is, even though the ethical obligation from an attorney in using the software would be to go and review the documents, in practice we found people were not really doing it. And as a result, we basically made it even easier for them to do it, right? So it took a lot of effort to be able to not just give you the document, but exactly which lines in the document matter the most for where Eve got the suggestion from. So what I expect to happen is it's going to be a bit of like a learning game from everyone using the software, bar associations releasing opinions, and vendors like ourselves also learning from the ground in terms of, what are the areas in which we need to be even more careful than what the opinion says, and what are some areas in which lawyers are asking us to be, more aggressive. So, for example, with Eve, one of the challenges that we solve for is, in some cases, it's actually useful to have behavior that could be considered hallucinations, right? So when you're brainstorming around claims to pursue, these are cases where you actually want Eve to be a bit creative, and there are cases where you want Eve to be very literal. And there are actually a lot of decisions we made under the hood that are not really expressed in opinions that we think are important, that actually make Eve safer and more important, more ethical, easier for people to be ethical in how they use software. So I think what I expect, Lindsay, to happen over time is like the regulation to get more articulate, and opinions get more articulate. And what we haven't figured out, and I would love people's thoughts on this, is how we can also work with others in advising and also keeping ourselves abreast of these changes as well.
Yeah, so that sort of brings me to the next ethical consideration, which is, I bet many of us have seen these horror stories in the news about people that submit briefs with fake cases. And there have been quite a few of these. And, this goes to several different ethical obligations, but one in particular that comes to mind is the duty of supervising attorneys. So, if you are a more senior attorney, obviously you have an obligation to make sure that associates and staff members, paralegals, that you're, overseeing their work, checking their work, etc. So there have been several instances where people are submitting briefs and everything sounds really good. You read the case and you think, oh gosh, this is just on point. This is the perfect case for my argument. And then lo and behold, to reference the word we heard earlier, it's a hallucination. It is a case that AI generated that actually does not exist. Yet it has been presented to the court, under your signature with Rule 11 penalties. And now you're in a real bind because, here's this case that doesn't exist. So what does that really mean practically for supervising attorneys? Well, I have a lot of thoughts, and I know we're going to talk about this a little bit later in the presentation, but I do think that law firms and other organizations need to have policies that govern the use of AI for their attorneys. And, as a partner, I would expect to know whether or not somebody has used AI and to what extent. The use of AI can never sort of usurp the obligation for a human review. So we always have an obligation to understand how AI has been used, but then also to review whatever the work product is. And courts are cracking down. They're sanctioning people for this, and some courts are starting to require that with a pleading, there be a certification as to whether or not AI was used and in what way, and that it was reviewed by a human after it was used. So I think that that's also a very important, very important part. This also implicates the duty of candor to the court with respect to these disclosures, making sure that you're in compliance if there is a disclosure certification, as well as making sure that what you're citing in a brief is appropriate. Another interesting issue is the client file. So we have this is kind of a sort of a rule that most of us maybe don't spend all that much time thinking about, but is what you put into an AI platform part of the client file? I mean, I think it arguably could be, and what you get out of an AI platform, is that part of a client file? It's certainly worth considering and discussing and evaluating whether or not that's true. So one final rule that comes into play here is fees. So what to do about fees? There are a couple of different ways where fees come into play. So are you charging, if you're using AI, are you passing the cost of the platform onto your clients in some way, like some of us do with respect to research costs or whatever? So that's one. And then another question is, we've just seen how we can realize some cost savings with AI. So when you're billing, are you billing for the hours worked or for the overall time that would have been spent absent the AI? I mean, if you're billing, there's some ethical opinions on this, which I think are completely common sense. I mean, you're billing, if you bill by the hour or, 6-minute increments, really, for most of us, you're billing by the time you spend. You're not, to the extent that AI is saving you time, you don't get to bill for what AI did. That would be unethical. However, if you have some sort of alternate fee arrangement or contingency fee, if you're a plaintiff's attorney, you can sort of bake that in. So, I think that those are worth thinking about. The Florida bar opinion that I referenced, which is Ethics Opinion 24-1 from January of this year, discusses the issue of payment. So if that's something that affects your practice, that's definitely worth a review. So, I've gone on and on, Cynthia. I certainly am happy to take any additional questions, and I think that's a good overview of the ethical rules that are at play. And I do know that Jenny has additional slides sort of demonstrating her use of AI that might be good to pivot back to.
All right, well, that was great. That was a lot for us to know and think about. I think that the next question, this kind of leads in from your talk, like what are best practices to have in place when you are using AI? And so Jenny, from a practical standpoint, what are things that you would recommend that people put in place when they're going to be implementing AI or using it in their practice? Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry, I'm not used to this platform. Like Lindsay said, it's any organization implementing that's going to be deploying a tool like this should develop a policy for the use of it. They should also be working with their vendor to understand how the tool works, how it's developed. Obviously, we're not technologists. We're not going to have an intimate understanding the way that a computer scientist would, but at least have a basic understanding of the security protocols, what type of data is used to train the tool, what happens to your data, in your client's data when it's input into the tool, what happens in the event of a data breach, and how can we educate our clients and pass on that information. So the first step obviously is having that open dialogue and understanding of the risks and the basic functioning of the tool, developing a policy and guidelines for anyone that you're supervising, whether it is an associate, a paraprofessional, an admin, so that they understand what is a permissible use of the tool and what is not. And then building in monitoring and review protocols, guardrails to ensure that any output, anything being filed with the court, anything being sent to a client has had an element of human review. And I thought one way that I could illustrate this is by walking through how I use some of these tools for drafting purposes. I mean, I use these tools at different stages of the matter, but I'll kind of skip ahead to the drafting piece so I can kind of what I think personally is a best practice in terms of using AI for drafting. So let me try to share my screen again. Okay. So I think Jay showed you earlier in the presentation this blueprint function, which is fantastic. On this slide, this is a mock investigation file case that I created. I asked Eve to create a sample, just set of facts, and I input it into Eve, and then I for a sexual harassment investigation, and then I asked Eve a bunch of questions. So this is what this screenshot is. And so I've created a few blueprints. These are all blueprints that I've created on my own by uploading my work product and having Eve analyze it. And so the way that I typically, if I have a document that I want to generate using Eve, and typically this phase is usually at the end of an investigation. So let's say, and this is obviously because my practice is focused on investigations, that's what my presentation is focused on. So there would be different processes for drafting a motion to dismiss or responding to a motion. But in terms of my practice, this is typically towards the end of the investigation. I have conducted interviews using Fireflies, uploaded the Fireflies transcripts to the platform, any documents that I've collected, any notes that I have, analyses, it's all been uploaded, and I'm ready to draft an investigation report. So I would select the investigation report blueprint. The way that I use these blueprints is really, I think of it really as a substantial outline. I would never just generate the report and turn it over to the client. And so I'll generate the blueprint, download it. And now that I know, I just saw Jay operate that function where you can actually edit it in Eve. I may actually do that now because I think I could probably draw from the files that I've uploaded in the library of information that I've uploaded into Eve. But typically the way I do it is I'll download it, read it through, and then I make edits as I see fit. Typically the end product, and this is not to in any way detract from the quality of the tool, because I think the tool is great. It's very helpful for generating an outline, for generating ideas, helping, cure writer's block, helping organize thoughts and ideas. But usually my end product is primarily my writing and looks very little like the initial blueprint. But it is an extremely useful skeleton for getting that report going. The other thing that I use it for is
Jenny, can I ask you a question about that? How much time would you say, I know you don't use that as your end product, but how much time would you say that saves you when you have that initial draft drafted by AI?
I think, I've tried to crunch these numbers, and it obviously varies by case, but I think it probably saves me somewhere between 25 and 30%.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
So the other thing that I use it for is, one, oftentimes my clients want, in addition to the investigation report, they want a summary of all the witness interviews attached as an appendix. For whatever reason, they want to know, if there were other issues brought up, or if something specific to a particular employee, they often have reasons to want to know, want just a digest or summary of all of the interviews. So I will, in those cases, I will use either Eve and sometimes Fireflies, and I'll show you how I use that to generate witness interview summaries that I can attach as an appendix. And again, it's something that I generate, I review it, I edit it, I make sure everything's accurate, I double check it across my notes. But it is a huge time saver, because otherwise, for me to go through and summarize every witness interview would take hours and hours, and this really cuts a lot of that time. The other thing that I use it for in terms of summarization is, so let's say I've generated that blueprint, I download it, I'm in the process of drafting, and there's one issue that I need a couple paragraphs on. It would probably take me 20 to 30 minutes to really craft that paragraph. I have the idea in my head. I can go to Eve and say, but for me to find all the parts of the transcript, I know the witness said X, Y, and Z about this date and this document, but for me to go and find all those different parts of the transcript and the document that they referenced would take me a while. I can go to Eve and say, draft 2 paragraphs summarizing in detail what this witness said about the meeting that took place on January 26th. And within 30 seconds, it's drafted the paragraphs. I can say in a formal tone. And then I'm usually editing the paragraphs. It's never exactly the way that I would phrase it, but that is a huge time saver, because I don't have to go to every single source and draw it all together. You can't see it on this slide, but I think it was evident in Jay's demo that when there are a lot of files uploaded to a particular matter, you can select or unselect which files you want the Eve to use for the particular task. So, and that also helps improve the accuracy of and the speed of the functions. So, if I had 100 files uploaded to a case, I would just go to the transcript and the couple documents that I know pertain to that specific issue, select those and say, based on the selected documents, draft a paragraph on X topic. So I find that to be a really helpful enhancement to drafting. So this is Eve. This is another great tool that I've been using Eve for. Eve can generate charts. And so this is from a case where I was doing a position statement about a salesperson who was underperforming. And so I uploaded their sales performance and asked Eve to create a chart. And I plunked this chart into the position statement to demonstrate that this person's performance was inconsistent over time. And again, this is something that it would have taken me at least 30, 45 minutes to create this chart manually, and I had Eve generate it in a matter of seconds. This slide is from Fireflies. So, and this is what it looks like once you've completed a meeting, it automatically generates a screen that looks like this. It has the transcript on the side. I went in and edited it so that to protect client information. But it has the transcript on the side. In the middle, it has an overview. It has the summary of the interview, and then it has this Ask Fred bot here. So in this, I can ask Fred questions. when did the witness report her concerns about Dr. X? And it pulls it right up. It has a link to exactly the place in the interview in the transcript where this line of questioning took place. If I want to listen to it again, I can click on it, go right there, I can read it. I can copy and paste from either Ask Fred or from the transcript or from the overview. And I can ask as many questions as I want to ask, or rephrase the question, ask Fred to rephrase its answer if I don't like the way that it's phrased. And the same goes for Eve. If I don't like the way something's phrased, I sometimes ask it to rephrase. Sometimes I find, and this is a problem I find across every chatbot I've used, is that it tends to write in passive voice. So I can just ask it to rephrase in active voice, and it usually is pretty good at that. Here's a similar function I do. I use Eve for a similar function. Asked it the same question: when did the witness report her concerns about Dr. X? And this is the answer that that Eve came up with. So Eve's is, a little bit more detailed, but similar. The thing I like about Fred is that it can go right to that part in the transcript. But I think Eve is a little bit more, because it is developed for legal practitioners. It has a tendency to draft more the way that a lawyer would draft. And because we're on, Lindsay just gave that great overview of the ethics of using legal AI. I think it's important to talk about co-counsel and its legal research function. I have found it useful for things like simple research questions that I then kick over to Westlaw to do the follow-up research to make sure that there aren't any hallucinations, that it's not citing cases that are totally outdated, and that I'm, citing the most current law and up-to-date research. So to kind of give you an example of how that might work, here's a question that I recently asked. Find an ADEA case discussing what constitutes substantially younger when the comparator is over 40. And so it generated this response. Click on the link, and it takes me to Westlaw. So when you click on links in co-counsel, it takes you to Westlaw. And from there, you can do all of your normal research functions, like, you can see it was distinguished. So you can read the case, find out if it's still good law. You can go to citing references, make sure, go to the head notes, make sure that everything is current and up to date. This is an old case. So I think in this particular case, then I went and found, I should have pulled it, but I went back and I said, can you find the most current leading case? And then it gave me a different case. And so then I went back to Westlaw and verified everything. So, you still have to do those tasks because it does not, the AI doesn't really understand key cite functions, and it doesn't necessarily, it'll show you if something is flagged, but it's not going to tell you exactly if it was reversed on other grounds or exactly, how if it's still good law in your jurisdiction. So you still have to go to Westlaw and do those types of activities. So, when you're drafting, it's something to keep in mind when you're drafting best practices or a policy for using AI for law firms, for associates to follow. Make sure they understand that they still have to do their jobs to key cite and make sure that any case they're citing is good law. But it can save time in terms of helping you find the leading case in a particular jurisdiction, or I have this case from this jurisdiction and I want to find a similar one in another one. It's great for functions like that. And then I also use it for my counseling practice. And here's an example. Some of these in the blueprint, I recently used the blueprint function to create a blueprint for an employee handbook, which I then used to generate, again, a first draft of an employee handbook. I used the instructions panel to say, small tech company in Illinois with 20 employees hired me to draft an employee handbook, and then it will draft up the handbook. I still download it. I go through, I make sure it has all the state specific requirements. I make sure that, nothing that doesn't apply to a 20-person organization is in there. And then I go through and tailor it towards that company's specific needs. So that's just I think that in terms of best practices, this drafting and legal research are really key, that you have clear protocols in place and that associates understand their duty and obligation to review, to revise, to double check, and that more senior attorneys understand that they need to be monitoring and making sure that, obviously you can't check every case, but at least talk to your associates, especially if the firm has officially deployed AI tools. Make sure that your associates understand their obligations and that they're complying with them if they're going to be using those tools to create work product.
Thank you. So, Lindsay, do you have any specific recommendations to insert in policies, AI policies?
That's a good question. I do think that, do you mean internal policies, like internal firm policies?
Yes. Yeah, internal firm policies.
Yeah, I do think that, firms should decide what they're willing to allow their associates, and lawyers to use. I think that should be very clear. In a larger firm, I would think that would be vetted very stringently by, in connection with IT and the vendors, and that the vendor contract review process would be very robust. So I think that it would come with, these are the approved platforms that you may use, and you should affirmatively let the supervising attorney on the matter know if you have used them, so that they can specifically be aware. Also, as Jenny just talked about, you must personally review anything that the generative AI platform gives you, so to ensure that it's accurate and reliable.
Okay. And Jay, on your website, do you have some template or something that you have that has implementing some sort of practice on AI practice? I thought you had something like that.
We do, yeah. We've made a AI acceptable use policy template. We've worked in collaboration with a number of our customers on, and we also have the same things Lindsay mentioned. However, the other thing we do suggest each individual firms do is apply a little bit more filtering from knowledge of the staff they have, right? So, for example, which are the policies you think they would have trouble following, and make a bit of tweaks accordingly. So, for example, some of the things we found to be helpful are some firms really systemized their pleading document generation. For example, let's say complaints you file. We actually had them customize our template even more to really go step by step and almost get people to do it exactly one way that forces them to double check the work. And these are types of tweaks that I would suggest you apply based on your own knowledge of your staff and which processes you found to be most useful for your firm.
Okay. All right. So one question I have is, if you are going to, and I guess all three of you guys, if you could kind of chime in on this, but if you decide after this great seminar that I'm going to implement AI in my practice, what is the best way to approach it? And I think it may be a different advice for someone who maybe is a solo practitioner versus someone who has 10 employees versus someone who's a big firm. So I don't know, who wants to take the first stab at it? Jenny, you want to go first and say kind of what, when you approached it, what did you do and what things would you recommend?
Sure. Well, I think to your point, I think the number one thing you want to do is ask what problem am I trying to solve? And that will help guide. And what is my organization? What are that will help guide what uses um, are most appropriate for your organization, your practice, your employees, your team. And so, a platform like Eve isn't necessarily going to be appropriate for every size firm or every type of practice. I think that, and I'm not saying that it has to be, I don't work for any of these companies. I think, and there's a lot of products out there, but like Fireflies, I think is something that um, most organizations could probably benefit from, just because I can't tell you how many times I've interviewed someone or had a meeting with someone and they've said, oh, I want something like that because my notes are always difficult to read or I can't find them. And so it's just, I think something like that is probably beneficial for every organization. But yeah, I think the first thing you want to do is ask yourself, what problem am I trying to solve? And making sure that you're current and looking ahead to the future. How are we going to keep up with, our duty of competence, how the landscape is evolving, what technologies are out there, and understanding who's going to have access to these tools, under what circumstances, what kind of guardrails are we going to put in place to make sure that our clients' data is protected, that our data is protected, that it's being used in a way that that ensures we maintain the level of service and quality that we are accustomed to. So I think those are the types of questions that you need to be asking yourself. And then, comparison shopping, talking to folks like Jay and others, understanding the different functionality and understanding where those organizations are going in the future. Like I'm in touch with Jay and his team a lot about, I'm having this issue, or I have this idea of how the platform can be improved. And they are like super responsive and have incorporated several of my suggestions. I'm sure I'm not the only person who suggested some of those things. So, I think part of it too is just, like Jay said, talk to other attorneys and firms who have used these tools and find out what they like and who they trust, and how their experience has been in terms of selecting a reliable partner who's going to evolve and grow along with you as the technology continues to evolve and be incorporated into the practice of law in a more integrated and robust fashion.
Okay, how about you, Lindsay?
So I think that was a great perspective from, from the perspective of like a solo or a smaller firm. I currently practice at an AM 100 firm. So, these decisions are, I pretty much do not have decision-making authority for the use of a generative AI platform, for the firm. And, for us, we do have systems that we use. Those have been, carefully vetted and rolled out, and, we have our own subscriptions and that kind of thing. So I think it's very dependent on where you are. But I agree with everything that Jenny said. If you are in a position to make the decision for your own practice, those are exactly the things that you want to ensure that you're looking at. I think the confidentiality is really paramount. Understanding how the data is going to be used, inputted, used. Is the model being trained on your data? Is it going to, potentially be shared with anyone else? And then, making sure that it's not, and then making sure that your employees and subordinates know how to use these platforms and how to, be aware of the potential pitfalls.
Okay, Jay, from your perspective, what do you think? If you're
I
considering,
agree with
yes.
I agree with everything Jenny and Lindsay are saying. The only thing I can add on to that is we spend a inordinate amount of time analyzing this to a science, right? So basically, how do we improve the adoption rates of Eve within every attorney in the firms that we go into? And at this point, we actually have a pretty sophisticated process that merges together people, process, and technology, right? So we effectively do hire and make sure we're responsive to our clients to the best of our ability. We segment clients by the size of the firm and their dynamics to help advise them on what are the areas they should likely consider first, and what are the problems they should likely solve first. And sometimes identifying these problems are also hard as a firm owner, and we help with that as well. So we're ultimately just turning this into a science game, right? Like turning this into what are the processes we can put in place that takes any law firm that we really see and helps them get operationalized. As a result, our process for large law firms looks quite different than what we do for solos. Um,
So what is the different process, would you say, for a large firm versus a small firm?
so with large firms, typically you want to account for you have to spend, not one way to think about it is you have to spend a bit more time thinking about people and risk mitigation in general. And as a result, the way we typically roll out for a larger firm is a lot more methodical and a bit slower, right? So it's typically a 2 to 3 month long process where we advise them on starting with a smaller set of use cases to begin with a smaller set of people, and really getting a handful of people that understand the technology really well and also know their firm, right? And then we work with them on curating the rollout process from that point onwards. And the larger the firm, obviously, we can also invest more behind it. As a result, depending on the features they need, if they need integrations, those are types of things we can also help with. Where some of the large firms are using some pretty bespoke document management solutions, let's say, and getting data on Eve becomes a bottleneck. We would go solve that problem as well and make it easier to adopt.
Okay. So one question I have for you, Jay, is as a technologist, where do you see AI going in the future, so we can see kind of what the capabilities are going to be even more than what we've seen now? What do you think we should be looking for? What's going to happen?
Yeah, I think the interesting bit is this is the worst it's ever going to be, right? And it's pretty good already. And the fundamental difference I think that's happening right now is what I said in the beginning, which is it's very, very difficult for a single person that exists to somehow ingest knowledge over millions of litigating cases, right? End to end, the whole workflow. And using that knowledge in any new case going forward. For AI, it's going to become possible, but ultimately it's still a tool. You still have to learn how to use it, and you still have to put it to good use. And there always, in my opinion, will be a need for a person to be involved. I just don't see that really changing. It's happened with every single technology wave we're part of. The only difference, though, is I think the leverage of a single person is going to be way more than we ever expected. So like where we see it going is a lot of the things where today Eve looks like it's just generating first drafts are going to get closer to final drafts. That's going to be a process that keeps improving as accuracy rates and technology gets better. And it's likely going to get more into processes. You're already seeing Eve kind of suggest the next message you might want to type, right? And that's going to get into tasks and how do you actually do, how do you get the best possible outcome for a case, let's say. And Eve will actually be able to suggest what things to even work on to optimize for that best possible outcome. So those are the areas where I expect there to be innovation. And where research is heading on the fundamental layer is it's looking like all this scare about Skynet and AGI is likely not going to happen. And we're just, at the end of the day, we're going to be limited by literally power that's we're capable of producing. So that is going to slow things down eventually. So I expect AI to get probably slightly better than a human and stay there for a while before we see any other big jumps.
Okay. All right. So here's some questions for thought for everyone. What do you think, what skills will lawyers need if in the future in light of AI? Are they going to be different than what the skills are now? Jenny?
Well, I mean, the first one is drafting prompts, writing prompts. I think it is truly an art form, and that it is key to getting the use out of the platform that you want. So if you just write, tell Eve, write me an attorney demand letter or respond to this attorney demand letter, Eve will do a decent job, but it's not going to know exactly what you have in mind. It can't read your mind. That's one thing that AI can probably never actually, fully do. Maybe it can get pretty good at guessing, but it can't actually read your mind. So, learning how to draft detailed prompts in a way that the tool can understand and that will result in the output that you are going for. And I think that could be an entirely like an entire training module for onboarding new attorneys. Paralegals is just the art of writing AI. And then I think, something that is probably something that will come with experience and time is just knowing and through crafting clear policies and protocols for the use of these tools is just understanding what these tools should be used for and what is really should be continued to be done by a human, and learning how to use these tools in a way that really, like I said at the beginning, supports and enhances your practice instead of just substituting or becoming a substitute for a human. I use it to create witness interview outlines. I don't just rotely follow the outlines. I still have to, when I'm in the live interview, I have to adapt and come up with follow-up questions on the spot. But it comes up with a pretty good structure of the topic I need to be covering in these interviews. So that's an area where I feel like it's always going to be an enhancement of the human element of practicing law, not a complete substitute. So just understanding what tasks it's best suited for, how to use it, and incorporate it into your practice.
Okay. And Lindsay or Jay, do you have anything additional for that?
No, I just think that AI can help us realize a lot of efficiencies, but it's never going to replace the role of an attorney, completely. And that's for a lot of reasons. I mean, every day we make risk assessments for our clients based on, things that we've seen and things that we've done. So I do think that the technology will continue to get better and better, but I don't think it's going to, replace our role as attorneys completely, at least.
Okay. Okay, so I've got a question. Do you think it's going to be unethical in the future? This is just a thought I had for attorneys to charge a billable hour, and if they're not using AI, and AI could really, if they did use it, would substantially cut the time that the client would be charged.
I can take that one. I think that's a really interesting question, and my answer is not yet, but maybe in the future. And this goes back to the duty of competence, which is we have to understand technology and how it can make, our legal work better and provide better services for our clients. And if it's going to represent, cost savings and streamline work, I think we've got to, make sure that we're doing that. I do think the technology is still very new and developing, so I don't think we're there yet in terms of sort of an affirmative obligation to, have to be using it, but I do think we will get there.
Okay. I was thinking, is there any other things that you think we haven't brought up that anyone wants to bring up before we open up the floor? We have like 10 minutes for questions, and I think maybe people will be interested, but is there anything anyone wants to bring up on the panel that I haven't covered?
No, I'll just add to Lindsay's comments about the shifting landscape of the billable hour. I think, for years it's been questioned whether the billable hour will continue to be the standard for, large law firms and how they bill. And I know, alternative fee arrangements are something that have been explored for decades now. I think that the advent of AI, and as it is used increasingly by lawyers, I think that it will perhaps accelerate the shift away from the billable hour. I don't think it's going to totally eradicate it, because you still, to the extent that lawyers still have to spend time being lawyers and doing law, they have to, recoup that time somehow. But I do think that it will accelerate the shift away from the billable hour for some types of matters, and perhaps inspire creativity in terms of new billing models and the ways that law firms and lawyers generate revenue and create value for their clients.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I'm trying to figure out how we can do questions from the audience, if we can have them put questions in the chat, and then maybe Susan can provide those to us. Not sure if that would work. Let's see if Susan's there.
I'm here. I'm just copying and pasting into the.
Okay, can we have them?
I just sent them in the chat, so you should be able to see.
Oh, I see it. Okay, so the question is, do you consider Firefly's transcript generation to be superior to something else?
Yeah, I didn't finish.
Oh, okay. Do you want to, Susan, you want to just ask the questions?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. So there is no more left in that. That's where the person ended it. So so I don't know if you want to just.
Well, I know that there's other transcription services, but have you looked at other ones, Jenny?
So not in any, not significantly. I mean, every once in a while I do. There was a different one. It's called, I forgot what it's called. I used for a little bit. The reason I liked, it's not that I thought Fireflies was more accurate. I think there are a lot of really accurate AI transcription services out there. I used one or two others on a trial basis. I think one's called TLDR. I'm forgetting. Supernormal perhaps is the other one that I used. And the reason I went with Fireflies is not really so much because of the accuracy. I think they're all probably equally accurate, but more so the platform and the functionality, because it's just like a nice, I'm going to pull up this dashboard that I have so I can show you how nice it is.
All right, got to make you the presenter again.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, yours.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, every time my computer freezes every time I have to. There we go. Okay, I don't want to do that. There we go. Okay. So this is this sample meeting that I went in and redacted client information so that it's so I'm not disclosing any. But I really like, it comes to your meeting and I don't have to do anything after that. It's just automatically in there when you click on the meeting, and I have folders. You can organize it by client, by matter. And so I put, all of the meetings for one investigation into a folder. I can search across all the meetings in that folder. I can't really demo it for you, that function, because it's just, I can't anonymize the data. But when you open up a meeting, it looks like this. You have so much information at your fingerprints. The transcript's over here. You've got the overview of the meeting, the short overview. You've got a list of action items. It automatically generates a list of things that you need to follow up on. It's not always 100% accurate. It's usually over-inclusive, but it is helpful. It has just bullets of the notes. And again, you can click on any of these and go to the part of the transcript where that talks about it. Again, an outline. It automatically generates this outline. So I did not, and it's remarkable because I always go into every interview with my own outline, and these chapter headings almost like mirror my outline headings exactly. It's really remarkable. Maybe that's a testament to my, like, I like to give signals. Okay, we're gonna talk about this now, but it's really helpful in terms of how it organizes the information. And then I can't scroll down here because of the way the platform works, I can't anonymize the information, but this is actually a custom app that I created, this witness interview tracker. And I asked it to do 3 things. Let's see if, yeah. So this is just, and literally when I say I created this app, all I did was tell it what I wanted it to do. I wanted it to summarize the main points from the witness interview. I wanted it to list all the identified facts that the witness disclosed in the interview. I wanted it to list any documents mentioned in the witness interview and list the names of any other witnesses mentioned during the interview. So all that information is right there in the dashboard. After the interview, if I have to reach out to that witness or to HR or whoever I'm working with at the client to pull certain documents, I can copy and paste the list of documents into an email and then use that to craft an email request for documents as a follow-up. So I think it's a great platform. It's really useful for my purposes. This is the Ask Fred bot where you can ask it, whatever questions you want to ask about the interview. And yeah, and you can put in bookmarks. You can write notes to yourself for later. So that's why I use Fireflies, not so much because of the accuracy, but because of the platform and its functionality.
Okay. Susan, are there any more questions?
Yeah, I have another question. Do you consider use of AI a, quote, dumbing down of lawyers? And if AI, this is all part of the same question, if AI is doing the work and drafting, don't lawyers lose the experience of drafting, writing, researching, all of which makes them better lawyers?
I definitely think that's a very valid concern. And I wouldn't say dumbing down, but in terms of my bigger concern is about for developing attorneys, newer attorneys, really honing their skills. I feel like I'm pretty good at assessing whether or not the work product generated by AI is up to snuff because I've been practicing for a number of years and I have my own quality standards. I don't know. I don't know if someone, didn't come up drafting themselves, how they're going to learn those. Because I really do think that you become a better writer and a better lawyer by doing, by having practical experience. So I do think that, and the question raises an idea in my mind, like when you're drafting best practices or drafting a policy, you might want to gear it towards the level of attorney and making sure that more junior attorneys are equipped not only to do the work themselves if AI is not available, but to be able to assess the quality of the AI work product. They have to be able to do it themselves. And so maybe you want to gear it towards, limiting the amount that more junior attorneys can use these tools for activities like drafting.
I think that's a great point. And Jenny and I are pretty much the same year of experience or within a year or two. And, we grew up as lawyers doing all of this ourselves. And I do think that lawyers, more junior lawyers, need to have that experience to build their skill set and, to be able to edit and things like that. So I don't know how you necessarily balance that, but I do think that's a valid concern.
I might just want to throw my hat in on this one, just from a different perspective. I've been practicing a long time, and I do think those skills are really important. But it may be in the future that if drafting can be done and edited, that in the law schools they're going to teach them how to edit it, and they're going to have to focus on different skills, making sure that it's accurate and making the product better. And maybe focusing more on their people skills and on their creative skills, giving them an opportunity to do that. So I do think that for us, that was really important, the writing and everything, but maybe in the future, that won't be as important. You still need to be there. A lawyer still needs to have the skills, but maybe the drafting isn't going to be the most important. It's going to be more the editing and making sure you read it and make sure it's correct. That's just my 2 cents on it. But
Yeah,
anyway.
I think it depends on the use too, right? Like if it's a motion to dismiss, that might be something that can just be done by in the future. I saw there was a case recently where someone used it to generate ideas for crafting a closing argument.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something, in terms of presenting in court, whether it's oral argument or at trial, something that I feel that it's important that the attorney really be presenting in their own voice. And it's something that you have to develop over time through repetition and practice and writing, and then practicing what you write and then editing and revising. So I do still think that there's going to be a need for lawyers to be able to write. But maybe it's more focused on those types of activities versus just drafting a motion to dismiss, which can be fairly formulaic.
All right, well, I think our time has come. It's 2 o'clock, and I really want to thank the speakers for spending time getting ready for this and sharing all their great knowledge. This is a great panel, so thank you so much. And we're going to do another AI seminar in October, and the next one will be focused on employers and how they're using AI. So thank you very much to everyone for joining, and have a good afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.